Welcome to the iPad Podcast, a weekly podcast from Mac's Future.
Okay, welcome to the iPad Podcast. This is Lex at Mac'sFuture.com. Hey, today is March 11th, 2012, and what a crazy week it's been in iPad world. We have a lot to talk about, and remember, this is a chit-chat-free podcast all about the iPad, iPad news, iPad apps, iPad devices, all things iPad. So thanks for listening, and you can support the podcast by going to iTunes and giving it any sort of positive review that you can, or on YouTube or on Blip TV. So God, we have so much to talk about, so much iPad stuff to talk about. And so let's get to it, the iPad Podcast. Okay, well, the crazy week started off really on March 7th, 2012, in the middle of the week. Apple had its great event, its March 7 event, to announce the iPad, the newest iPad, the third generation iPad, Tim Cook. And if you're looking at the video of this, I have a little clip here of the Apple special event. Tim Cook, who's the new CEO, started off the proceedings. And I think a lot of people who like Apple and who like the iPad were not disappointed. I think this was a major event. And the new iPad in particular was, to me, it was a great thing that came about. So if you didn't see it, I have a link to Apple's presentation where they went through not only the new iPad, but the new Apple TV and a new app and some important upgrades to apps. But the key was really the iPad 3. It's, to me, I immediately ordered one. So I don't know, where do we start? There's so much to talk about, right? This is such a big deal, the third generation iPad. Well, let's talk about some little stuff. If you look at the screenshot here, Apple's homepage, apple.com, it says revolutionary, the new iPad. Now, what's interesting is they didn't call it the iPad 3, and they're getting away from that. They're just calling it the iPad. And a lot of people have been debating that, going, oh, what's going on? Why are they just calling it the iPad? Why not the iPad 3? We have an iPad 2 and then the first generation iPad. And I think what Apple's doing is it's thinking, you know what? Why confuse people? Because, look, we don't number Macintoshes. We didn't number iPods. And if you think about it, even the iPhone, the numbering really was a little confusing if you think about it, because remember, the first iPhone came out, I think it was in 2007. It was just called the iPhone. The next iPhone that came out was the iPhone 3G. It wasn't the iPhone 2, and it was called 3G because it had 3G cell phone service, because the first iPhone was only on the Edge network on AT&T. So even that 3G was not really numbering it, but recognizing that it had this cell phone data connection. And then after that, we had the 3S, and I don't know what the S was. I guess it was to say, look, it looks just like the 3G, but we're going to give it an S because it's super and maybe faster. But then, bizarrely, we then had the iPhone 4, which I guess was the fourth generation iPhone. So I wouldn't be surprised if Apple just goes to calling the next iPhone the iPhone. And I accept this. I don't think people are going to be confused. It's not like they're selling the original iPad. Apple is selling the iPad 2 16 gigabyte version in Wi-Fi or in Wi-Fi and 3G service. But I think it's fine that they went to this new way to name it. So, wow, the iPad, the new iPad. A lot of the stuff that I and others predicted came true. So what are the big things? The big things that I think are in the new iPad, and which, at least for me, I have the iPad 2. I did order the iPad 3, and let's go, or the third generation iPad. So let's talk about why? What are the big reasons to upgrade? All right, I see 4 or 5 big reasons. Okay, the first is it apparently has this incredible screen, and by incredible, as everyone predicted, it has this high definition screen, which is like a Retina display. And basically what they did is they doubled the pixels on the x-axis and the y-axis. So they've really quadrupled the pixels. So now it has about as high a resolution as many pixels as a 27-inch iMac, but all squeezed in to a 9.7-inch screen. So, after this event, some of the journalists who were there at the Yoruba, Yoruba Buena Center, whatever, in San Francisco, they went and got to play around with it. And one guy I really respect is, I think, Ryan Block over at GDGT. It's a gadget site. And he was just blown away by the screen. Because he says it's so intense, the screen, because it's a Retina display like the iPhone 4S, or in the iPhone 4, but it's on a much bigger screen. He says it's like you're just, I don't know, it's so lifelike, And so, I haven't seen it. I'm going to get one delivered on this Friday, the 16th, but I expect it's going to be quite stunning. So one reason is just simply this new incredibly high-resolution screen is like a new paradigm. And if you go on Apple's store, they show you comparison of what's in the iPad 3 when you compare it to the iPad 2. On Apple's store, there's a compare iPad models, the new iPad with the iPad 2. So the old iPad and also the first generation was 1024 by 768 pixels. And the new one is just double that on the X and Y axis, 2048 by 1536 pixels, for a pixel count of 264 pixels per square inch. Now that per inch pixel count is still a little less than the iPhone, but the thing is, this is on a much bigger screen, so it's pretty impressive. So that's one, to me, that's like a huge upgrade. The Retina display is huge. The second big thing is that they really upgraded the camera. So the camera on the back side used to not be that good. The back camera before could basically, I think it was like 1.5 megapixel. It could do video recording at 720p, but it really couldn't take good photos. But now it has a 5 megapixel camera, but with all the optics and fancy stuff that make the iPhone 4S camera really good. And the front stays at VGA quality photos and 30 frames per second VGA. But the big thing is that this is really a stunning camera. It's a very solid, beautiful 5 megapixel camera, and more importantly, it can shoot high definition video in 1080p, and that was a big theme here. And you'll see, because they announced the Apple TV, and that can now play in 1080p. So having like this huge, beautiful camera on the backside, a lot of people were disappointed that the iPad 2 didn't take better pictures, and now this is a picture machine. This is a really good device to take pictures in movies. And a lot of people are like, oh, the iPad's too big to take pictures or movies with. But I got to tell you, I've been to a number of events, with kids and fathers, and I've seen a lot of people take movies or even pictures with the iPad. And there is something cool about having this beautiful screen as a viewfinder. This, instead of like a little screen, you can just see everything when you're shooting a movie. So that's a big upgrade. So that's number 2. So the third big thing that's the upgrade is that these iPads are the first Apple devices that have LTE, which is the next generation cell phone data connection from the cell phone carriers. So LTE they refer to as 4G. I mean, that's kind of a misnomer because pure 4G is supposed to be if you get 100 megabits per second download, but these are faster networks. Verizon has a 4G LTE network, and so does AT&T, and so does Sprint. But the iPads, interestingly, weren't released as of now on Sprint. So they have the new iPad comes in either, if you want the cell phone data connection, you can get either with LTE on AT&T or LTE on Verizon, and it's backward compatible with those networks' 3G service. And one of the cool things that they did, Apple, is that they made it so that you can still put in a SIM card when you're outside the country, and it'll work on foreign networks, not LTE, but 3G, let's say in Europe or China or Japan. So that's good because if you get the Verizon iPad, like before, you couldn't really take the Verizon iPad out of the country because it didn't work on foreign networks. You had to use it on a CDMA network here in the United States. So that's a big plus. So you're going to get higher speeds with LTE if you get the cell phone data connection. And also, Apple announced that they're going to support the iPads becoming Wi-Fi hotspots, which means that if your carrier supports it, you'll be able to use the cell phone data connection to connect up to 5 different devices to the internet through your iPad. Okay, so that's the third big thing. Now, I would say the fourth big thing that was announced is that the iPad now supports what I say is half of Siri. And by half of Siri, I mean in the iPhone 4S, you can dictate into anything that takes the keyboard typing. So in the iPhone 4S, there's like a little microphone on the keyboard where you can dictate. And they included that in the iPad, the new iPad. One disappointment was I was sure that all of Siri would be in the iPad, the third generation. And what they did is they just did half of Siri, because Siri has 2 parts on the iPhone 4S. There's the part that you can just dictate instead of typing. So, for example, if I want to type an iMessage, I open iMessage, and at the keyboard I press the microphone and I dictate. And if I have an internet connection, it'll type out the words. But the other cool thing with the iPhone 4S is Siri, which is this robot, this woman robot where you can talk to and ask questions and get answers from. Like, say, Siri, tell me if there's any pizza stores in my neighborhood, and Siri will go online and do a search for you and come back and give you results. So that's not in the third generation iPad, just the voice dictation. And so on one hand, I'm thrilled that the voice dictation is there because I use it a lot in the iPhone 4S. I think it's extremely helpful. I find myself dictating more so than half the time rather than typing because it's just easier. But the Siri missing was kind of a bummer. So those are four big things. So there's still a couple of other things that are cool and also enhancements that didn't get as much attention. Okay, so there's a fifth thing that was added to the iPad that I think is also very significant, and CNET.com really pointed it out in an article by Brian Bennett on March 9th entitled New iPad First Tablet with Bluetooth 4.0, Should You Care? And it basically says that the most, this iPad, like the iPhone 4S, is the first, it's the first iPad to have the next generation Bluetooth, which is a wireless communication platform that Apple and other computers have. And basically Bluetooth, it allows you to connect your keyboard or headphones to an iPhone or iPad. Well, the iPad, the new generation, has something called Bluetooth 4.0. So does the iPhone 4S. And here's what CNET says. The most notable new ability of Bluetooth 4.0 devices is to sip power slowly, especially gadgets designed to operate as sensors. These include gizmos that measure fitness performance, such as heart rate and activity, like Motorola Motative and Nike Fuel Band. And it goes on to say, this may not sound like much at first, but imagine coming home from a long day trekking all over town, a quick run, or sometime at the gym. Fiddling with cords and PCs to log a workout is likely the last thing you want to do at this moment. Thankfully, these fitness products are designed to talk to your iPad via wireless connection and automatically update your stats via apps running tableside. It goes on to say, in my experience, tablets rarely get switched off and typically are persistently connected to Wi-Fi networks. So it makes perfect sense for a Slate to serve as a Bluetooth hub in the home. So it also goes on to say that this type of Bluetooth can also help out with home appliances running space-age software. For example, it says, the home app accessory revolution has already begun. App-controlled coffee from the kitchen faucet? Yep, that's in the works. Your kid's not cleaning their teeth properly? There's an app-powered widget for that as well. The Beam Bluetooth 4.0 toothbrush. So basically it's saying this 4.0 more robust Bluetooth is a big addition to the iPad. I think it's also a big addition because I think 4.0 Bluetooth can also handle better capacity and connectivity. And that's important because the iPhone and the iPad, they can wirelessly communicate by Wi-Fi or by Bluetooth. But Bluetooth is very key because, you can, a lot of times there are apps that can connect and play games with each other via Bluetooth. And so if there's a better connection, that's really important. I know, for example, Scrabble, you can, if two people with an iPad or an iPhone and an iPad or iPod Touch and any iDevice are in the same room, they can connect with each other by Bluetooth and play Scrabble together. And you can do that with other games too, I think, like the Monopoly game. So having like a better Bluetooth is also, I think, a big plus to this upgrade. So, but before we go on to other stuff, let's talk about the pricing and the timing of the sales and all of that. So here's the key thing. So for the pricing, they kept the price of the new iPad the same as the old iPad, the second generation. And by that I mean, if you go to Apple's website, you'll see it's the same deal as before. It comes in either black or white. And the intro model, which just has Wi-Fi and no cell phone data connection, is the same $499. And for that, you get a 16 gigabyte. You get a 16 gigabyte model. That's 16 gigabytes of storage. 32 gigabytes with no cell phone data connection but Wi-Fi is $599, and 64 gigabytes is $699. And if you want cell phone data connection, add another $130 to each device, which is the same as the iPad 2 was in the iPad 1. So you get 16 gigabytes at $629, 32 gigabytes at $729 and 64 gigabytes at $829. So that was interesting. Apple did something else, which is you still can get the iPad 2 brand new, but only the 16 gigabyte model in either Wi-Fi only or Wi-Fi and 3G. And the Wi-Fi only is $100 less at $399. And, look, the iPad 2 is a fantastic device. It was fantastic until the iPad third generation came along. And so that's an incredible deal. So Apple is basically really competing with the low-end tablet makers now, because think about it. Are you going to buy a Kindle Fire, which is much smaller and $200, when for $399 you can get this robust iPad 2? You might, but it becomes much more easy for someone to afford an iPad. Also, here's the thing. Apple's still clearing out its old iPads. And if you go to the Apple Store under refurbished deals, you can get real deals. For example, you can get a refurbished iPad 2, a white one with 16 gigabytes, second generation, for $349. So that's pretty cheap. Frankly, refurbished is like getting it new, because Apple, just has taken a return and has the same warranty. So, okay, and so then the other thing is that Apple on the 7th immediately started taking pre-orders for the new iPad for delivery on the 16th, that's this coming Friday, and announced that it would be selling in stores this coming Friday, the new iPad, and that the new iPad would be sold on the 16th, including the pre-orders starting on the 7th in 10 countries. And these countries are countries like Australia, Canada, France, Germany, England. So these are pretty big countries. So the pre-orders started on the 7th, and the afternoon of the 7th, and I went and tried to order. And what's interesting, it was really hard to get through. You had to go through either Apple's website or its app on one of the iDevices. And what's interesting, I was trying to get my order through on both the website and my app, and in the end, it was actually easier to finally get my order through for a new iPad on the Apple Store app on my iPhone, which I thought that was very telling. In some ways, the apps are so much easier to use than, navigating a website in a website store. And I think that's one of the beauties of, this sort of app world that we've gotten into. A lot of people complain that, we're sort of siloed. But frankly, with, hundreds of thousands of apps, I don't feel siloed. I rather feel that I still have the internet through my iDevice, but that I have a different user interface for different internet-related things. Because all these apps work with the internet. A lot of them do. The difference is I'm not resigned to just going through the internet through one single application, which is what a web browser is. So rather being like web browse siloed, I have more freedom by having a choice of hundreds of thousands of apps. Anyways, I'm digressing. So already throughout all 10 nations in the United States, the pre-orders for delivery on the 16th have sold out. And now on Apple's website in the United States, if you want to get the third generation iPad, I think it says that the earliest it will ship is March 19th. So that I don't think that you'll get it on the 19th. I think that it'll ship. You'll probably get it, a couple of days after the 19th. But, I think last year Apple sold out immediately and then was sold out for weeks But I think this year Apple, was very prepared with lots and lots and lots of inventory of the new iPad. I think they were prepared for the incredible demand that they're getting. Now, tonight, I got notice that my iPad has shipped. And what's interesting is it indicates that it's shipping from Pennsylvania. And last year, I recall, when I got the notice of shipping, it said it was shipping from China. So I think what Apple did here was it already shipped before the pre-orders were even taken, like millions of iPads to the United States from China, and stockpiled them in different parts of the United States. So my iPad, I think, is already in the United States, and it will be leaving from Pennsylvania. Now, I'm in New York, and that's not that far away, and I'm fascinated. I'd be fascinated to know if Apple will somehow mistakenly, or UPS or FedEx will mistakenly deliver it to me before Friday the 16th. Maybe I'll get it on Thursday the 15th. In the past, that's happened occasionally. I'm not sure if it was with the iPad or the iPhone, but that would be kind of cool if I got it like a day early. So that's the bottom line on the logistics. But let me go to some other stuff that was announced that really is significant. Now, Apple introduced a new app that works both on the iPad and the iPhone. And it works on the iPad 2, the new iPad, and the iPhone 4S and the iPhone 4. I'm not sure about the 3GS. But it's basically called iPhoto. It's like iPhoto on the Mac, but a lot of people are blown away by it, and it's very interesting, and it's only $5 or $4.99. And I said this, a little while ago. Adobe came out with Adobe Touch for the iPad that costs $10. And the problem with Adobe Touch, and I haven't bought it, is that it only supports low-resolution pictures and not pictures that are shot with your iPhone 4S. And it currently wouldn't support pictures shot with the new 5-megapixel camera that the new iPad has. But iPhoto is a huge, very cool app that really shows off the power of the iPad, the new iPad, as well as the iPad 2, and all the cool things that you can do. And basically, you're going to have very cool multi-touch editing, much more powerful than the photo app or the camera app that you already have on the iPad or the iPhone. And so, I played with it a little bit on my wife's iPhone. I'll get to that in a second as to why it's not on my iPad 2 or iPhone 4S. And, I haven't had a chance to fully explore it, but it looks pretty amazing and pretty powerful. You're going to be able to, like, for example, through touch, change the background of a blue sky to make it lighter or darker. You're going to be able to do stuff like double tap on a photo, and then it'll find all photos similar to that you have in your library and collect them together. And it just comes with like all sorts of brushes to do better editing. For example, let's look at this. There's a lighten brush. There's a lighten brush. There's a saturate brush, a red eye brush, a repair brush, a desaturate brush, a darken brush, a sharpen brush, a soften brush. So there's a lot of editing that you can do in there. And then there's photo journals. You can basically now publish to iCloud and share your pictures with people from iCloud. Now, this is a great replacement for galleries. Remember, we used to have in Mobile Me galleries. Well, Apple's getting rid of that this summer. So basically, you're going to be able to create this very sort of cool, organized journals of like your trips and adventures with like different thumbnails of pictures from your iPhone or iPad and publish them to the cloud. So that's very cool. And then also, obviously, they also added the ability to now edit stuff in your photo stream through iCloud. So you can delete and edit stuff that's in your photo stream And of course, there's AirPlay with the Apple TV. But anyways, this is like a real hardcore photo editing app on your iPad. And I bet you this is going to further lead to people abandoning their computers and using their iPad for all purposes, like photo editing. And I got to tell you, look, I know computers very well. I've been using a Mac forever, but I have both iPhoto and Aperture, and I have massive amounts of photos, and I just can't get up to sitting down at the computer and organizing my photos and, editing them and publishing them and sharing them with family that's out of town. I just kind of dread it, just the workflow. But I think having iPad, or having iPhoto on the iPad in the iPhone, I'll be quicker at editing the photos, because let's say that I take pictures with my iPhone and I've got iPhoto there. I'm going to quickly edit them there and then maybe create a journal rather than having to wait until I sync them to my Mac. The other cool thing that you can do with iPhoto is now, if somebody else has iPhoto on their iPhone or iDevice, you can beam the photos from one iDevice to another through a common Wi-Fi network. Now, I don't think what I'd like there to be is if you could beam the photos to your Mac. But I guess in some respects, the photo stream does that too. So anyway, so this is a cool app, and frankly, even if you don't get the new iPad, you should get it. It's only $4.99. It looks really powerful, great for organizing and editing photos, and so I highly recommend it. Well, the other big app news is that Apple announced two major upgrades, one to Garageband and one to iMovie. Let's talk about Garageband. So with Garageband, there's a couple of really big things. One, they added new smart instruments, and those smart instruments include string instruments, and they really sound good. They have cinematize, and you have violins, bass, all sorts of string instruments, and so that's really cool. But I gotta tell you, the coolest thing in the new GarageBand, and actually it's a free upgrade if you only have GarageBand. And what is GarageBand? I think it's only $4.99. I mean, this is a bargain. If you never got it, if you buy it once, it's good on your iPhone and your iPad, including the iPad too. But the big thing is this thing called Jam Session, and I tested it out. And what Jam Session is, you can connect up to 4 iDevices, including iPads or iPod Touches or iPhones, that are playing GarageBand through either Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. So if you don't have Wi-Fi around and you got like 4 people with iPads, you launch GarageBand, and then one person can become the band leader and say, I want, other GarageBands on iDevices to join me, and up to 3 others can join him to create a quartet. And they'll all play together and they'll be synced together, and the music played together, if the band leader wants to, will be recorded on the band leader's iPad. So this is really cool, and it's a way, they've got a little video here, and one person could be the guitarist, one person could be the drummer, one person could be the singer, one person could be the, the bass player. And, it's, who knows, maybe some professionals will use this. But it's, it just shows that Apple does stuff that makes all of us feel like kids, right? This stuff is really great for kids to play with, but all of us at heart is like a kid. And so all of a sudden you've got this incredibly neat contraption. I was showing this to someone. I took my iPhone and iPad. I'm like, look at this. My iPad GarageBand plays with my iPhone GarageBand, and I can sync them together and play. So that's a very cool upgrade. And, You don't need the new iPad for that, but I'm sure it'll play even better on the new iPad. So the iMovie app for the iPhone and the iPad also got an upgrade. This $4.99 app is now a little cooler. And so what are the big things? If you already have it, you just upgrade. If you don't have it, you should think of getting it. So they took some stuff that the Mac iMovie had, which is you can now do Hollywood-style trailers. It gives you some templates. It gives you 9 movie-like templates, with themes, fairy tales, superhero, romance, narrative. Now, I played it with it on my Mac iMovie, and it's fun. If you've got kids, you can take some clips and make it look like it's a big adventure movie. But it looks like you can also make your own little outline for a trailer or templates. So that's really cool because you could design your movie. Also, it has themes. It had some themes before, but it looks like it sort of expanded the themes. But also, I think there's better face recognition and Ken Burns style panning based on face recognition. And they also upgraded the sound effects that come with it and the soundtracks that come with it for background. And I guess you could do this before, but you can, fine-tune all the editing. So I wouldn't say it's as dramatic an upgrade as the Garageband upgrade, but they did add some cool features to iMovie, and you should upgrade or think about getting it since it's only $5. Apple also announced an upgrade to what arguably is an accessory to the iPad, and that's the Apple TV. And I say that it's an accessory because the Apple TV goes incredibly well with the iPad. The iPad 2 went incredibly well with the iPad, with the Apple TV that existed because of AirPlay. So AirPlay, is this phenomenal technology where if you're on a common Wi-Fi network, your iDevices and now your Macintosh can send videos or mirror what's on the iDevice to AirPlay. So the major upgrade to AirPlay in terms of the hardware is that it got an A5 chip. So before it was an A4 chip, and so it's more powerful. And also it can now run 1080p higher definition video instead of just 720p video. So that's big because obviously the new iPad has 1080p content coming out of there. And so now we're going to have 1080p content on the Apple TV. And, there's also a software upgrade to the Apple TV, which gives the interface more like a iDevice-like interface with, apps or tiles representing apps. And look, if I'm not going to upgrade because I already have the second generation Apple TV, and I don't have a 1080p TV. I have two 720p TVs. But if I ever get a 1080p TV, I'll get the Apple TV. So you should think about getting it. But I should note, Apple, one reason I haven't yet played with the new iMovie that I mentioned, the upgrade, is because the iMovie upgrade and iPhoto will only work on the new iOS 5.1, which came out for the iDevices. And I didn't upgrade my iPad 2 or iPhone 4S because they're both jailbroken. And if I upgraded to 5.1, I'd lose my jailbreak. And one of the things that I do at my jailbreak is do video screen recording using a display recorder app that allows you to screen record on the iPad or the iPhone. So those apps won't work unless you upgrade to 5.1. But if you do so, there is currently really no jailbreak for the iPad 2 or iPhone 4S for iOS 5.1. Okay, so Apple also released an upgrade for iBooks and the new Find My iPhone. And basically, if they're upgrades so that they'll work well with the new iPad, because the new iPad obviously has this incredibly high resolution display. So that means a lot of apps are going to need new artwork that are high definition to look good on a new iPad. And so if you're not familiar with this, there's a lot of apps that are universal to work with the iPad and the iPhone, or to work with the new iPad and the old iPad. And the way it works is like there's a bundle in the app of pictures that are used by the app. And so there's going to be some pictures that are going to be for the new iPad and some pictures that are at a lower resolution for the old iPad, and then maybe some pictures for the older versions of the iPhone or the iPhone. So basically, that was the main reason that there's been an upgrade to the iBook. But also iBook got some functionality improvements. You can now search for a page number and jump to it with a single tap, and you can use your finger as a highlighter. This according to TUAW.com. And, you should probably upgrade if you're going to, use those apps. Now, if you're going to significantly use the new iPad or any iPad, I really suggest that you get one with more than 16 megabytes worth of storage. At least get the 32 gigabyte iPad or the 64 gigabyte. And by the way, some people may wonder, why didn't Apple upgrade the storage from, the most you can get from 64 gigabytes to 128? And I think it's because it would have raised the price of the iPad. Storage costs in terms of SSD storage have not really come down, and so maybe Apple didn't want to raise the price. And also, Apple's using the cloud more and more for storage for people. But Macworld.com had a very good point in this article entitled Retina Display Ready Apps and the Upcoming iPad Storage Crunch. Basically, Lex Friedman there pointed out that because of the higher resolution on the new iPad, a lot of apps, even the ones that are going to be running on the other devices, are going to be bundled with higher resolution pictures, which take up more space. And this could end up, it could be that, if you upgrade your apps, let's say on your iPad 2, you'll suddenly discover that the new version of the apps take up more space and that you have less space on your 16 gigabyte iPad or your 32 gigabyte iPad or your 64 gigabyte iPad. So Lex Friedman, so already there are some apps that have been upgraded. Keynote, upgraded to work on a new iPad, already went from 115 megabytes to 327 megabytes, according to Lex Friedman. The Numbers app went from 109 megabytes to 283 megabytes. The Pages app went from 95 megabytes to 269 megabytes. And iMovie went from 70 megabytes to 404 megabytes. So it says these, this is huge increase in file size. So, I would really, if you plan to, now, and also think about this, if you get the new iPad and you start shooting video with it, and that's 1080p video, you're going to be really storing a lot of data on your iPad. So I would, if you're going to be a hardcore user or even a moderate user of your iPad, my advice is spend a little more money, get the 32 gigabyte or get the 64 gigabyte. Personally, I'm getting the 64 gigabyte. I got the 64 gigabyte before with the iPad 2, and I think I also got it with the first iPad. I really think it's worth it just because, the apps take up space, the music takes up space, the photo takes up space, the movies, all that stuff takes up space. So anyways, think about it. It's a very good point by Lex Friedman. This new iPad appears to be selling really well. The Wall Street Journal came out with a story on March 9th entitled Apple Says Pre-Orders for New iPads Off the Charts. And so apparently Apple released a statement that said supplies of the new tablet it had set aside for pre-orders have already been sold out, and that the only way customers will be able to buy one when it's released on March 16th will be to go to Apple retail store or through one of the company's authorized resellers. Apple wasn't more specific, according to the Wall Street Journal. One analyst, Piper Jaffray's Gene Munster, thinks that Apple will sell roughly 9 million iPads in the current quarter. And remember, the current fiscal quarter for Apple ends at the end of March. So it could be that Apple sells 9 million iPads in essentially 2 weeks. So we'll see. We'll see what the lines are like on Friday the 16th. Now, the website Slashgear reports that people have already started camping out in front of some Apple stores. They had a story that came out on March 10th that said that there are 2 young gentlemen who are camped out in front of the Apple store in London on Regent Street. And there are 2 young gentlemen there. So, I don't know. I mean, today's only Sunday, and it's going to come out on Friday, so we'll have to see what kind of lines form on Friday. So it'll be interesting to see if this is sort of same craziness as last year. I remember last year in the United States, they didn't start selling them in stores until something like 5 p.m. on Friday. I wonder if Apple's going to do that again this year. I kind of miss that I'm not going to be standing in line waiting for it. I had it pre-ordered. That's what I did the first time the iPad came out. They allowed you to pre-order it for delivery the day of the sale. Last year, they allowed you to order it the day in the early morning, but not for delivery that day. So they keep changing it around. Now, what does this mean, really, in terms of the competitive landscape for tablets? Well, Time Magazine had an interesting article on March 9th entitled, Apple's new iPad should be Google's wake-up call, from Jared Newman. And basically he points out that during the iPad March 7th event, Tim Cook at one point showed how superior the iPad was from the Android tablets. And basically he showed various Android tablets apps and showed that really the apps were nothing more than blown up smartphone apps and not apps that had been customized for the iPad. And the thing is, on the iPad, there's lots of apps that are customized for the big iPad screen, and they're not just blown up little iPhone apps. You can run iPhone apps on the iPad, but the point is there's a lot of developers, and even Apple customizes its apps to run on a big device and look beautiful. And he also points out, Jared Newman, that another problem is in the Android store, other than the staff, Google staff highlighting a few, apps that are customized for tablets, they don't have an easy way for users to find other apps, Android apps that are customized for tablets. There's no, Apple, if you go to iTunes under apps, there's a button that says just show me iPad apps. There's a button that says just show me iPhone apps. And you can segregate and say just show me iPad apps. I just want to look by that. And it's very well organized. I think the other challenge really for the Android tablets compared to the iPad is that Google's just making the operating system, and there's all these different hardware manufacturers. And so it might be kind of hard for developers to make like a smartphone app and then know exactly how to customize it for the right tablet, because also, the tablets might have different specs. So I think that's a pretty fair criticism by Time Magazine's Jared Newman. Now, the Wall Street Journal also had an article out by a guy named Richard Clark entitled What the New iPad Means for Gamers, and I kind of disagree with his little editorial. He doesn't think the new upgrade to the iPad 3 does much for gaming. He sort of poo-poos the higher resolution screen and basically says nothing really new has been added beyond what's in the iPhone 4S. And I disagree with him. I mean, look, it's going to have a much faster processor. They boosted the processor speed. I think they doubled it, and they have a quadruple the video graphics speed. So all games are going to be zippy on the iPad the new iPad, and also it's a higher resolution, so they're going to look richer, much richer. Now this guy's, I don't know, he seemed to suggest in his editorial that there should be some other controllers built into the iPad, but that's silly. Look, the bottom line is that gaming on the iPad is a big advantage over systems like Xbox and Nintendo and the Wii. And maybe hardcore gamers are still going to stick with the Xbox or the PlayStation. But the reality is that the iPad opens up gaming to millions of people who would never go out to get an Xbox or a PlayStation. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, because it's so accessible. With an Xbox, you got to be in your living room, and you got to have like the TV there, and you got to have it, hooked up to that. And with the iPad, you could be anywhere and play a game. Similarly with the iPhone, you could be sitting in the lounge of an airport, or just like anywhere in the house or apartment. And then the other thing is that games on the iPad are much cheaper. I mean, I remember I got the Nintendo Wii, a number of years back, and if you wanted to buy games, they were like $30 a pop. It's kind of unheard of to get a game at $30 a pop on the iPad. I mean, most games are either free, 99 cents, or if it's a really good game, maybe $5 or $10 if it's a really, high polished game. So, I think this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He sounds like he's a hardcore gamer, but you know what? The iPad's not about the hardcore gamer. It's about the kids who never really got into hardcore gaming, the kids who were like 5 and 4, and they're going to play games on the iPad because it's just so easy to learn and easy to access. And they're going to be able to get lots and lots of games. So I kind of disagree with him. I think each succession of the iPad becomes a better gaming device because, faster processor, better guts to the hardware. Now, ArsTechnica.com pointed out that Apple also released a new app that'll make it easier for the enterprise to embrace the iPad as well as iPhones and iPod Touches. And apparently, Apple released a program called Configurator, and it allows administrators to mass configure and deploy iPhone, iPad, and iPod Touches, 30 devices at a time. And so I guess this is a free app. Before, Apple had something called iPhone Configuration Utility, which was released in 2008, but it had limitations. So apparently this will make it much easier in the workplace to control and deploy apps on iPads and stuff. And I'll tell you, I think the iPad is penetrating enterprise, because during my day job I work in a big enterprise situation where we really had a conservative IT department. For years, all we had is Microsoft products and Dell's and Microsoft products. And I noticed somewhere about like 6 months ago that the very high up people in our large organization, very high up people, were issued iPads by the organization. And then I just learned that people in middle-level management, from upper-level management down to middle-level management will be getting the iPad. And I remember, I was in a big enterprise before, and I remember that's how BlackBerry started. BlackBerry started, first it was like a rare device that like maybe the president of the company had. And then it trickled down to senior people in the enterprise. And now, like everybody in the enterprise has BlackBerry. Well, I think the iPad is penetrating the enterprise. And I think a tool like this from Apple, the Configurator app, is going to just help. And here's the website, the Mac Store preview. It's free. And here's what Apple says. You can configure up to 30 devices at a time. You can update devices to the latest version of the iOS. You can create and restore a backup of settings and app data from one device to other devices. You can import apps into Apple Configurator and sync them to new devices. And you can use the built-in editor to create and install iOS configuration profiles. And you can enroll devices with your mobile device management solution for remote management. So it's a way to control, basically, the iPads in your business. You can sort of limit their people's ability to download apps or what apps they can have, that sort of thing, and what sort of privileges they have. Here are some comments. One person writes, "This app was released right as we were manually updating, configuring 78 iPads for a conference. Huge time saver. In 5 hours of manual setup, we got through about 30 iPads. Now with the configuration app, we finished the remaining 48 in under 2 hours. Tip 1, if you have a device that is failing to complete the supervision portion, unplug the device and erase all settings, then plug it back into the configurator or Mac. Tip 2, we connected through a powered 7-port USB hub, but found that we had a higher rate of failure with greater than 4 devices plugged in at once. Keeping it to 4 at a time for less work worked best." So far it looks like it's pretty positive reviews. So that's an app that you want to get if you've got any sort of enterprise situation and are thinking of deploying iPads. It's called Apple Configurator. Now, we talked about, Apple and how Google fits in terms of its tablets regarding the iPad, but I thought Mike Eglin over at Cult and Mac had a really interesting article entitled "Why Apple Will Crush Microsoft in the Post-PC Era." And Mike Eglin, who I follow on Google+, really smart guy, and I kind of agree with him. And he said, look, Microsoft's big problem is that they can't let go of the past, and they're sort of stuck in the past. And Apple is willing to segue out of the past. For example, Apple's willing to cannibalize other products with new products and isn't worried. When the iPad first came out, Apple was sort of criticized a little bit, and some people were saying that the cheaper iPad was going to cannibalize and take away Mac sales. And Steve Jobs and Tim Cook have pointed out that actually the iPad, if anything, takes away PC sales. And Eglin's point, though, with Microsoft is Microsoft, they're going to try to compete with the iPad with Windows 8 tablet. And Windows 8, if you haven't seen it, it's basically an operating system that's going to work both on PCs and tablets. And so when it's on a tablet, you're going to be able to put it in this sort of tablet mode with tiles and stuff. And it apparently looks nice. But then you're also going to be able to have it look like a regular PC on your tablet. Now, the problem with that is that a regular PC interface doesn't really work well with touch. And Eglin points out, look, Microsoft came out with Windows tablets, 10 years ago, but they just were clunky because in a touch interface, you really don't want the traditional, computer interface that you use with a keyboard and mouse. It's a whole other feel. And Microsoft's problem is that it just can't let go of its cash cow, which is this, all these PCs that it's supporting in the enterprise and people who haven't, left the PC. The problem is the PC industry is not growing. So Microsoft's been stuck, supporting what it thought was its cash cow without really growing and innovating. Like, for example, Windows, for years, Windows was backward compatible with PCs that were ancient, PCs from 10, 12, 13, 14, 15 years ago. Apple, even with its Mac operating system, has been notorious at saying, hey, this latest version, it's not going to support, a Mac from 7 years ago or a Mac that doesn't have an Intel chip and is still using the old PowerPC chip. Because when you do that kind of support, you put in a lot of code, you make the software unwieldy, you limit what you can do in terms of the innovation. And Apple, in coming out with the iPhone and the iPad, said, no, we're not going to just take the Mac operating system and put it on a smartphone or a tablet. We're going to use some of that stuff, but make it a completely new interface, start from scratch, so that it'll fit with the touch environment. And basically, Eglin thinks that Microsoft's not going to be able to really do anything with Windows Tablet. Now, what's interesting is another reason that Microsoft maybe kept regular Windows with the tablet version is that it needs developers. And Microsoft has a lot of developers on the traditional PC platform, and it needs to get them to, make their apps work on the tablet. And I guess Microsoft was worried that if it just went whole hog clean with the new operating system for the tablet, it wouldn't get developers to follow. But the problem is, are developers going to really spend the time and effort to create tablet versions if there aren't crazy tablet sales of the Windows tablets to begin with? So it's a sort of a chicken and egg problem. I mean, also the other problem I see for Microsoft is already Apple's sold 55 million iPads, and the Windows tablets aren't coming out really till the end of the year. And by then, Apple could have sold over 100 million iPads. And so there are all these iPads out there. But it's not just that there are all these iPads out there. There's a whole iPad ecosystem out there. There are all these devices that work with iPads. There are all these businesses that already adopted the iPad. And so how are you going to, if you have like a new tablet and your competitor has not only 100 million tablets out there, but hundreds of thousands of apps that are polished and work on that tablet, and all sorts of like gadgets and accessories that work with it, and an infrastructure that works with it, how are you going to compete with that? Because if you're a business and thinking of getting, a tablet, aren't you going to go with the market leader? What's going to be the big reason that you go with a tablet? I think what Microsoft is hoping for is that, in enterprise, there are a lot of companies that have Microsoft Windows on their computer. And I think their pitch is going to be, get a tablet because it's going to be really compatible with your PC. But look, Apple has already made efforts to make the iPad compatible with a lot of stuff in the office. The email system works with, the Microsoft Exchange which is basically the email server for Outlook, and they have all these configuration tools, and a lot of apps like Apple's Pages work with Microsoft Word, and others work with Excel. And also, I think Microsoft is going to come out with Microsoft Word and Excel and PowerPoint for the iPad, simply because there are 100 million, or there are going to be 100 million iPads out there. So I don't think that Windows Tablet is going to make a major dent in Apple's iPad juggernaut. I think Apple's sort of way ahead of the pack. And the other problem Windows has is the same problem that Android has, which is Microsoft doesn't make the hardware. Instead, companies like Dell, companies like Hewlett-Packard are making the tablets, or Samsung. And so you don't have, the same sort of excellence in hardware fusing with the software that you do with the Apple and the iPad. So I don't know. Well, we'll have to see. It's going to be an interesting competition going forward in the year. Now, over at Daring Fireball, John Gruber linked to a great article by someone over at Slate Magazine that really sort of captured what's going on in terms of the competition. Daring Fireball said, the iPad is unbeatable. And in writing for Slate, this is what Farhad Manjoo said. according to the quote from Daring Fireball. Let's say you're Steve Ballmer, Michael Dell, Meg Whitman, Larry Page, or Intel's Paul Otellini. How are you feeling today, that being March 7th, a day after Apple CEO Tim Cook unveiled the new iPad? Are you discounting the device as just an incremental improvement, the same shiny tablet with a better screen and faster cellular access? Or is it possible you had trouble sleeping last night? Did you toss and turn, worrying that Apple's new device represents a potential knockout punch, a move that will cement its place as the undisputed leader of the biggest, most disruptive new tech market since the advent of the web browser? Maybe your last few hours have been even worse than that. Perhaps you're now paralyzed with confusion, fearful that you might be completely boxed in by the iPad, that there seems no good way to beat it. And then John Gruber writes, exactly right. And I think that is correct. I think there's a lot of fear right now at Microsoft, at Google, regarding what this iPad device is. And I mean, let's go with my final thoughts on the iPad. I think this is huge because it's not an incremental change. People say, oh, they didn't really give it a new name, and it has roughly the same form factor as the iPad 2. One thing is it's a teeny bit thicker and it's a teeny bit heavier. And by that I mean millimeters thicker, just millimeters, and just a few grams a little heavier. But the really revolutionary thing here, which I'm talking about at last, is that LTE cell phone data connection sucks a lot of battery life, and so does a high-resolution screen and all this processor power. Yet Apple still says it maintains 10-hour battery life when used on Wi-Fi and 10-hour battery life when used on 3G or LTE, which is incredible. And apparently the battery in the same form factor is 70% more powerful. So Apple apparently developed some sort of technology to really compact the battery and make it even more powerful without making it much heavier. And that's pretty amazing. So look, I think Apple was already way ahead with the iPad 2, and it's just further ahead. And, I think once people start seeing this device on the 16th, they're going to truly see how it keeps getting more and more incredible and a new paradigm for computing. Look, I think where we're heading with this stuff, my vision is, imagine what the 4th generation or the 5th generation or the 6th generation iPad is going to be. I think eventually they're going to be super thin. Microsoft Research had a video out floating around this week that showed how there is still a little bit microsecond lag in the touch interface that's created by the suppliers to Apple and to other tablets, and they showed a video of what it would be like to have touch where instead of 20 milliseconds lag, there's only 1 millisecond, and 20 milliseconds is very quick. And so we're going to have these incredibly responsive touch interfaces. But the other thing we're going to have is eventually we're going to have Siri come to the iPad. I think the reason that Apple didn't put Siri, they put the voice dictation on the new iPad, but not Siri, and I forgot to touch upon this before, was because I think Siri is still in beta, and Apple is still trying to deal with having Siri work well on the iPhone 4S. And I think they were worried that if they put Siri on the new iPad, it would just inundate Apple's servers. Now, I heard some people say, oh, Siri's not on the new iPad because, or Siri's not going to be on the iPad because what do you do when Siri's on Wi-Fi? That some iPads don't have the cell phone data connection all the time. But that's a silly argument because there's many instances when the iPhone 4S has poor cell phone data connection and can't connect to Siri. I've used Siri a few times, and you have to connect to the servers. But also what's silly about that argument is that the voice dictation that Apple has in the iPad works by taking your voice and going up to the servers on the internet. So it doesn't make sense, that argument, because Apple did put voice dictation, which requires a server connection to the internet. So the argument that, oh, Siri isn't on the iPad because the iPad doesn't have necessarily 3G or cell phone data connection all the time doesn't hold, because the voice dictation doesn't have cell phone data connection all the time. So, look, I do think that eventually we're going to have just much better connection to the internet, and we're going to have voice dictation on the iPad. And then last week I talked about, or actually on my, let me go to my blog. This is kind of interesting. At Mac's Future, there was a very interesting article. Let me scroll back. Here it is. Where is it? It's this haptic. Well, basically, there was a rumor right before the iPad, new iPad came out, that there's a company in Finland that found a way to make sort of haptic touch on displays even better. So what that is so that, like, when you touch the iPad, you would be able to, like, sort of feel stuff and get feedback, so that when you typed, you'd feel letters even though it was a smooth surface. And I do think that kind of technology we're going to see pretty soon. I think we're going to see in the next year or the next year after that, Apple work into the surface of the iPad some sort of haptic feedback where you can sort of feel stuff even though it's a smooth surface. And again, like, voice recognition is going to be, like, incredible. I think we're just going to be astounded by how thin and light. I wouldn't be surprised if they make it so that it's going to be easier to read in sunlight. You know, the Kindle's big thing is that it uses e-ink, and so you can read it on the beach. And while these displays are sort of backlit, I bet you eventually Apple have technology so that you'll be able to see bright colors in sunlight. And anyways, it's a really exciting time in computing, and I think we're lucky to be living at a time when we've got, like, devices like the iPad coming out. I thought I'd end the show with highlighting a cool new app that came out, particularly if you have kids. I know I'm downloading it. It's called Scholastic Storia. Scholastic is a book publisher that makes, great stuff for kids to read. And so they have a free, essentially, book buying app called Scholastic Storia. It's free, and they give you some free books. They give you 5 free ebooks for child reading, and then I guess books for sale are, somewhere between, I don't know, like $1 and $10. So, Scholastic is a very well-respected publisher for kids' books, and this looks like a really good app to get on your shiny new iPad. So check it out. Okay, so that's it for episode 92 of the iPad podcast. This is Lex at Mac's Future. Thanks for listening. Today is March 11th, 2012. And, you can help out this podcast by giving it a positive review in iTunes. And I'm hoping, if I get the new iPad on the 16th Friday, I may do a podcast, the iPad podcast on Friday, the 16th. So you might want to check it out Friday night or Saturday, because I might go over and have some video or screenshots. Actually, I won't be able to have screenshots because I won't be able to jailbreak the new iPad. But I might be able to just sort of film it, just the old-fashioned way. So thanks for listening, and see you later in the week. Take care.
This has been a Mac's Future production.